as reported by the Sacramento Daily Union News of the morning of July 2nd, 1864. Daring stage robbery. During yesterday forenoon, the town was full of rumors and extravagant statements concerning the robbery of Wells Fargo and Company's Express, the other side of Placerville. The amount of coin and bullion reported to have been taken was variously stated at from $5,000 to $40,000, but little specific information was received at Wells Fargo. The Pioneer Company's stage was stopped by 6 or 7 men armed with shotguns and pistols. The robbers broke open the chest and took out the contents. After the stage started forward, one of the passengers, a Virginia City police officer, is reported to have fired 2 shots at one of the robbers. It is probable, however, that no injury was done, as the robbers stopped a second stage which came along a few minutes afterward, again taking a quantity of gold coins from this stage, but they did not disturb the bullion.
Good morning, everybody. I drove for the Pioneer Stage Line. We had stages running between Sacramento and Virginia City day and night. It kept me busy, and the company was second only to the Wells Fargo Stage Line, which had connecting hubs in Sacramento, Folsom, and Marysville. We get a lot of passengers coming west into California seeking their golden opportunity. And traveling over the Sierra Mountains wasn't as perilous as it was in 1857. The road was much improved, and the toll keepers maintained the climb to be no greater than 7%. I often wondered about getting into that business someday. Delia, my wife, well, she didn't see so much of me, and we also had little George, who was just 3. I was thinking it was time for me to find a way to be home with my family. There's a station stop at the base of the climb going up to Slippery Ford called Strawberry. Now that was a real nice place. I thought if I could purchase that place, I'd be doing what I know and getting my wife's good cooking too. With the war going on and the Pioneer Stage Line coming right out of the Comstock, you could say we were running the payroll for the entire federal government. We carried bullion, coin, and the regular mail. Shoot, the mines alone in Virginia City made over $20 million the previous year. That's over 100 tons of bullion going into San Francisco. That's a heck of a lot of business. And the Pioneer Stage Line was the biggest and about the only regular line you'd find coming and going over the mountains. Well, it was a night in June of '64. I was driving out of the American River Canyon with a 6-up team and a full load of passengers out of Virginia City. It was late enough that I had to have the side lamps on. Can't see much with them, but other travelers can see you coming. I knew that the coach just a little ahead of mine was young Ned Blair's. His load was about the same as mine. Now, I didn't count the mail and I didn't handle the bullion, but when that strong box was loaded up, it was my job to get it to where it needed to go. I'm not a banker, but I know that strong box was rarely riding empty heading west. The road gets pretty narrow and you can't travel fast very safely, especially as you're coming up out of the canyon. There's a pretty tight curve there, and doggone it, if I don't see Ned's lamps just a little ahead of mine, and he stopped. I figured something must have broke, or maybe one of his horses somehow got injured. The road wasn't very busy as it was near 10 o'clock that night, but I had a schedule to keep and I needed to get his coach moving or out of the way as quick as I could. So I hauled back, set the brake, handed the reins over to the passengers who was riding up along with me, and got down to see what Ned needed. I stopped about 4 or 5 rods behind Ned's coach. That's about 80 feet. But before I could get to my lead horses, out of the darkness, a big shotgun barrel meets me and I'm made aware that this was a robbery. I got back up on my box just as instructed and stayed put. Ned's coach was let go pretty quick, and the gang of armed men came to mine. But before his lamps disappeared around the bend, one of his passengers shot back at us with a pistol. Well, I got my lead horses more than nervous, and here we were, less than a foot of running room on the downhill side of the stage, and a tall bank going up about 10 feet on the other, and in front, a hard gang of robbers all hopping mad. I had to talk calm for the sake of all of our souls, and told my passengers not to fire, and reminded those robbers that we weren't the coach that fired on them. They calmed down, and their leader comes up to me and says, "Gentlemen, I'll tell you who we are. We are not a gang of robbers, but a company of Confederate soldiers. We don't want anything of the passengers, so don't act foolish. All we want is Wells Fargo's treasure to assist us to recruit for the Confederate Army." You got to understand that the war affected us even out here in California. Both sides wanted to get their hands on the gold and were willing to rip our state in two in order to get it. These fellas were part of the Knights of the Golden Circle out of San Jose. Anyway, I threw down 2 sacks of bullion, and one of the robbers found another sack. My passengers kept pretty quiet while the robbers were going through things. Except for one of the ladies. She started talking to the robber that was covering us with a gun from the front wheel. Now, I suppose that made them Southern sympathizers feel a little more at ease, but it also gave them the idea to ask my passengers to contribute a few dollars to assist their cause. Now, I just don't think you're giving someone an option to not contribute whilst you're aiming a gun at them. Anyway, I figured they got about $20,000 in coin and dust, but it wasn't like we were counting things out between us. Their leader then hands me a blank receipt. I was to fill in the amount they had taken and hand it to the first authorities I came across. The man covering and holding on to my lead horses let go, and we were allowed to move on. We were about 1.5 miles from 13 Mile House. That's where Colonel F.A.B. and his brother had installed one of the telegraph stations. Now, as long as the teamsters who hauled heavy freight didn't cut the wires to do the roadside repairs, that telegraph line maintained a good communication between Placerville and Carson City. We got into Placerville, but the word got there well before us. I handed off the reins from there and joined up with Sheriff Rogers and his posse to go find the bandits that same evening. We left Placerville around midnight. Now, I was probably a little excited and running on what you guys nowadays call adrenaline. We galloped back up on the Placerville-Carson Valley Road and came across a couple of suspicious fellas. Well, I don't know, they just seemed suspicious, kind of hanging back, curious, but not showing their faces. Maybe one of them was one of the robbers that pulled a gun on me in the dark. Maybe I was just starting to see robbers everywhere. Well, the sheriff took them back to 13 Mile House and questioned them. Turned out they hadn't anything to do with it. It was a little later that morning that Constable Van Eaton showed up from tracking over the Diamond Pleasant Valley Road. He and Constable Rennie and Deputy Staples had found the tracks of the horsemen going into Somerset, and they split right there at Spencer's place, now a market called Holiday. Van Eaton said the posse had to get down there and help Rennie and Staples, but by the time we got there, the 2 lawmen had gotten in a tangle with the robbers, and Staples was shot dead. I did give testimony, when they brought 3 of the robbers into court. Then I had to get back to my occupation. But you could imagine my nerves were on edge. In fact, it was the very next year that I did buy that station stop called Strawberry. I was not going to be a target for any more road agents. Anyway, Delia and I had a little girl in 1866, and another little boy too. My family and I ran a real good place there. We called it the Strawberry House, but it had to be rebuilt after a fire in 1868. We ran good business until the railroad cut in on the freight that was going over by wagon and stage. Still, it's always been such a beautiful spot. We ran it each year until Snowshoe Thompson had to start carrying the mail by foot over the snow-covered pass. Then we'd come down to winter in Placerville. My daughter Olive and her husband ran it as a resort after I passed on. Well, the buildings may have changed, but the heart of the place is the site itself, with the granite mountain behind it and the tall green pine trees and the fresh crisp air. Boy, would I love to see all that again. I hear traffic using that road is busier than it was in my time. Well, my life's been filled with lots of stories, and I've lived a pretty good one. But that night, the stages got robbed. That had to have been one of the most important nights of my life.